Hi everybody. welcome welcome to tonight's episode of Ramblemancy. Just all right, right out the gate. Incredible. Welcome Sam to Ramblemancy. Sam understood the assignment right away. So yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, exactly. Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. All of the Ramble fam and those brand new to the Ramble fam, or those temporarily in the Ramble fam for the evening. Welcome. Ah, oh no, did I just? I
Oh,
okay. Never mind. We're good now. We should be able to hear everyone. Because apparently
oh
they
no.
it muted itself. Unfortunately. So
So let's hope I articulated enough to properly poison captions with my actual words.
there you go. Um. uh. Yeah, no, Amethyst, we do a lot of bits here. That one I think might have been beyond our ability to focus and commit, but I mean, I won't
Mhm.
speak for Sam, but
I mean, I think this is just another layer of what they might have read but did not hear
you
that we trip, fall, get up as though we intended it.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
It was a bit.
It was
How clever of
definitely
you to spot
a
it.
bit.
Yes.
um
Excellent chat. Well done. Well spotted.
Incredible. So, we don't have too much for announcements tonight. It's a regular week of programming. The one thing that I will say is our set part two of our Beyond the Roll, our shorts on Patreon, will be out Sunday. It should be up on Patreon on Sunday, so all patrons of the $5 tier or higher should be able to see it. And one thing I have been forgetting to mention lately is that if you are subscribed here on Twitch and also in the Discord, you will also get access to those, even if you are not subscribed on Patreon. So, uh, that's it's some good incentive. But I won't go into that right now because we have some rambling to do. Um,
Ah, yes, our scheduled rambling.
the scheduled
We
rambling,
must be disciplined.
it's important to distinguish it from our unscheduled rambling because that's kind of
Mhm.
the rest of the time. So
Yes,
uh
I have a very pretty blue pen that I put on Fridays for the scheduled rambling. So
yes.
like
So tonight we will be talking about um for at least some of the episode, we hope, we will be talking.
Let's see if we even approach the topic.
You
Yes,
know,
yes, yes.
it's happened before where it hasn't happened. So tonight we're going to be talking about tabletop RPG mechanics and narrative and role playing and how all of those things commingle to create one of possibly the best hobbies in the world. I'm definitely not biased about that, but
no.
that's an objective fact. So um,
Because value judgments can absolutely be objective. Exactly.
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, to get us started, John, you usually have good ways of getting us into conversations. This time I
I think
didn't throw you under the bus, I just gently drove it over you.
I was gonna say I think that's maybe the politest way you've thrown me under the bus at the beginning of an episode.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it earlier, and like I think one of my like pet topics, especially when I'm writing a game or working on a game, is what does role playing look like, or what can role playing look like? And I always think that that's a fun place to jump off of into conversations like this, because I I remember I was working, I think, with Matthew Gravlin on Articles of the Arcana, and if I recall, he has a section in the book that that more or less is like role play can look like a lot of things. If for you it's describing what your character does in like comic panels, or like it's a shot from a movie, it can be that. It doesn't have to be necessarily like sitting in character and like you know speaking as them or things like that. So I think what can role playing look like is maybe a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I remember when we were doing the Avatar game a few months ago. In between I think after one of those episodes, we actually did kind of have an adjacent conversation about like physicality when it comes to role playing, as opposed to doing the voice, right? I think, and so like I always find that to be a really interesting distinction. I don't know if you have like any thoughts about that.
Well, so if we're going to get into the role playing side of things right away, I'm a games as art sincere, earnest dork, which is to say that I think that this is a artistic, creative act with a range of skill expression as well as enjoyment. It is an art that is also very fun to do, which is great because if anyone sits down and tries writing a novel, not all art is always all that fun to do. It's one of the great things. That's why so many creatives like end up craving role-playing games really badly because it's very fun. And we can maybe get into why as we go. But in that, I think of things like physicality and voice of what role-playing is as unique means to this artistic platform of expression, analogous to cinematography and film language. That the way you use mechanics or the way you role play are all intended to achieve some sort of effect, in the same way that if a camera's sort of long off watching from like behind the bushes of a shot, we're kind of getting the sense that like the camera is a person watching. And then mechanics can serve for role playing, and different elements of performance like voice, like physical theater, are the counterpart to film language to convey an idea or an experience or a story the way that only role play does. And there's a whole range of ways to do that, as I think John's identifying. And I think in the same way that, you know, Wes Anderson has a style.
Right.
Christopher Nolan, a distinct style.
Mm.
Yeah. That's really interesting because this is more on the end of on the GM end of things, but something I've started doing is I would not have done this, I think, had I stayed like exclusively GMing like home games, right? Like offline and stuff like that. But because of the streamed medium, I've started taking it's like it's not quite fourth wall breaking, but it's almost like when I describe scenes or things like that, I'll like actually make an intentional note of the camera, right? Where I'll like talk about like the camera pans in and that kind of thing. And I think that's kind of a similar thing that I've taken to doing, largely because the effect that I'm trying, like it's awareness of the medium, essentially, like awareness that we are here on screen performing for an audience, and we don't have a lot of those analogs that we have in film that are useful in storytelling in that medium. So the best way to do it is to describe familiar shots that people are familiar with from film and that medium. And that's kind of a thing that I've started doing that I don't know that I would have done had I not started streaming. Because, yeah. I wonder, is that kind of like sort of like an analog to like what you're talking about?
I mean, I think it's interesting to me that you might or might not have done it in a non-streamed environment, because when I think of describing camera movement or comic panels, I think of that as a way to convey compressed information to your people. It's a descriptive language, kind of like memes. The context of what memes are convey the idea.
Right.
If you're saying that the camera does this, you're drawing on people's film language to fill in the blanks as quickly as possible. And so your description as a GM conveys as much information about tone. Because like film has visual information, audio information, camera, all of the film language things we were just talking about. GM, like your tool, I don't envy you. It's just the word things. You got word things. You got maybe like movement from a sternum on up. Like you're worth like a sternum.
Yeah.
Depending on how much headroom you give yourself. Like, you know, I'm not even working with that right now. We're good for a collarbone. It's not a lot of space, but it's also very sparse tools to convey information. And I think using common film language, film tropes is a way to kind of shorthand, right? So that people get the idea that you're conveying what you're actually trying to get at.
Right, and that's definitely, I think, why I've started doing it, is because I've seen it as a useful shorthand for where I feel like in my GMing I am lacking, which is I often am lacking for descriptive words that I need in the moment. Like I have a clear picture in my head, but getting it from there to here is difficult. And so like that film language has become very useful shorthand. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting comment in chat. Cactus Hug says that's interestingly similar to conducting, and I'm curious what you mean by that. I'm very curious what you mean by that. We have a couple of music nerds up here, and now I'm thinking about
yeah, we discovered that. See, I do think it's a little similar to we're both vocalists and talking in pre-show a little bit about voice, but I think it's kind of similar to voice lessons and voice training where one doesn't have strong, overt, conscious control over the means of vocal production. And so in voice lessons, they'll throw all of these metaphors at you.
Right. Or
just imagine a string pulling yourself, like all of this stuff meant to approximate, meant to get you into a posture that like your muscles happen to get it right. And then you just got to lock it down from there.
Well, everyone in chat had just watched me physically correct my posture to good singing posture because I could hear my voice professor saying exactly what your voice professor said to you, presumably, like a string that exits like right out the top of your head that just kind of runs up your whole spine and just go whoop.
Yep, you said it. I heard it. I felt it this time. I can't because the pup is in my lap. You should say hello, by the way.
Yes, please.
Say hello.
Hello.
You were an anxious bean, so we are your thunder shirt. Oh my gosh, and now you're just snuggly, you monster.
Oh, good.
Say hello to Ferocia.
Oh,
hi. This is our pup deucer on site.
Excellent.
So,
very important role.
So I think in the same, so like if we're going to draw the analogy here, I would say like pulling the string is to using film tropes, film description, and shots and panels as vocal production is to conveying a scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, I didn't have an interesting thing to say. I was just going to follow up. Continue, John, please.
Yeah, no, like I'm further kind of following this like this music lesson like metaphor or
we got so abstract immediately, y'all.
Cactus Hank says the ability to convey complex information through extremely limited physicality is the basic job of conductor. Right. Okay. So like
side note, conducting like training, big helps. Big straight up helps, especially because I trained sitting.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I can see how. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're working in this medium now,
it's the same canvas.
Yeah.
This is also why I envy tall people. Like of all of the things, when I see someone like Alex Ward, he's just got so much limb he can work with.
Yeah.
Oh, the orchestra conductor at Lucas and I's college was well over 6 feet, and watching him conduct a full symphonic orchestra was a thing of beauty.
It's a whole thing. Haydn conducting. Well, thank you, Cactus. I wouldn't have put that together. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. As soon as you read that out loud, John, I was like, oh my God, wow, yeah. Like I know nothing about that side, like that world at all, like conducting the, like I know nothing about it, but like just from what I've heard friends of mine who are in it talk about, and from what I've seen them when they've been practicing, I'm like, yeah, actually, that's like what you just said about the same canvas. Yes, it's perfect. Like, yeah, that's fascinating. Huh. I'm
Yeah,
gonna have to let that
because
absorb for a second.
I didn't get to the point in my major where I was taking, or before I switched to English as a major, I didn't get to the point that I had taken many conducting classes, but like my brother is a music teacher, and like, you're kind of working within a box as a conductor, more or less. Like you move in and out of it a little bit, like making certain artistic choices, but like this is the box in which I'm conveying like rhythmic information to you. And so like, yeah, no, just the more that I think about it, the more apt the metaphor gets. It's very interesting.
I mean, look, you say that, but like, so I mentioned I train seated because like I don't do bipedalism. It's a fool's game. The only way to win is not to play. But you don't get a lot of leaning. And if you really want to pull sound out of someone in an orchestra as a conductor, you gotta lean. And I swear I almost fell off that bar stool so many times.
Oh no. Yeah.
Oof. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess also if we're talking about physical theater and we're talking about descriptions as role-playing techniques, I don't know, like the taxonomy of this is not established. But
sort of a new
figuring out where you want to make the break between what you're conveying in body language and what you're conveying through description, because you only have sternums up, is the choice. How much are you just doing? How much are you willing to just let be body language, to be not for podcast audience, if you will? Right. And when do you decide to make the break into narrating your action lines? How much can you get done just by dialogue and physical theater and never narrating your action lines? What kind of characters do you play that can do that? And which ones do you only narrate action lines?
That's really interesting.
The strong, silent, brooding ones.
Yeah, I was about to toss this over to you, Freeman, because like you I don't know if a lot of people are aware of like the kind of work, because like I think most of you who have seen Freeman roleplay have seen Freeman roleplay on Infinite Horizon, where he plays Mason, a very like sort of stoic, reserved character. Isn't Mason's actual descriptor is guarded, isn't it?
Yeah.
So like
absolutely.
Those, I think some now with like Freeman playing other characters like Jace in our Cyberpunk game and that sort of stuff, like y'all are starting to see some of like the reality that, like, I think it's Drax says this repeatedly, that like he for the longest time had no idea, is that just Freeman role playing, or is that the character, and he had no idea.
You never know on the first character. Exactly. Sometimes.
And then all of a sudden Freeman comes out with a totally different, just very like kind of manic and like excitable type character, and it's just like, I don't know, it's fascinating. So I'm really curious, Freeman, like if you have thoughts on what Sam was just saying about like the like that, like turning the dials basically between like, the like vocalizing your character or describing or just body language. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, because I know you also have a lot of theater experience too. So
the longer we do this at Rule of Lore, the further away from my theater experience that we go. But I did do theater, and I think I don't know exactly how to answer the question, to be honest, because I haven't really given it thought. I think I just harness some being and I just go. And if the being is not there, then it doesn't go. But I do draw inspiration, I think, because we're talking about physical theater to a sense, and I do have inspiration for like that kind of thing, and it's I think Harpo from oh no, I'm blanking on the show. It's got Harpo, it's got Groucho Marx. It's from like the 30s, 40s era.
Is there a specific? Oh gosh.
But it's just a very all he does, he doesn't speak at all. All of his everything he does is through physical comedy. His facial expressions have to be like all there because he's not a talking character whatsoever. I'm going to remember this an hour after the show with the name of
Chad
this.
will have you by then.
Yeah.
That's true.
Chad's got you.
Marx Brothers. Thank
Okay,
you.
I wasn't sure if
That's
that's
it.
what you were going for.
You know, and it's one of those things that like you're timid of saying because no, the thing I'm thinking couldn't be correct. Cool.
Mhm.
Awesome. I should never doubt myself.
Yeah, it's a universal streamer experience. You're like, am I about to be wrong on the internet in front of somewhere between like 20 and 150 people? Oh god. And then like someone in chat, like you just kind of crowdsource the brain cell to chat.
And I appreciate chat for that so much, especially since I'm mostly a morning streamer when I'm being, myself and not other people.
Yeah. Yep.
But seriously, if we're going to talk physical theater, can we talk about sitting with characters?
Yeah.
Because I've had characters where just the chair was wrong.
Ooh.
And I don't mean to be a diva. When I mean to be a diva, you'll know. But some characters have a gay lean, obviously. Gay lean. Some, like, I had a very comfy chair for Callisto 6. It was very, very cushioned. And so I had to kind of like sit on my feet, like Neil Seza, to get enough height over the table to like be appropriately heighted. And it was perfect. It was exactly what I needed all of the time. But I had one where the chair didn't fit me because I'm wrong sized. And so my feet couldn't touch the floor. And it was really a problem for like my very uptight stoic that I'm like, wait, I'm goblin squatting. This is wrong.
Yeah, you're trying to portray like kind of a stiff character, but at the same time you're also
I can't embody it. The chair is wrong.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like there's I'm sure people watching Beyond the Roll have probably seen me sitting in this chair and then like pulling the arms up randomly. So like when I go in for like to do like to play something out, because I'm like, I need so much more room to be Cam right now. Like this person is so over the top and I cannot be constrained by anything.
Genuinely one of the things that, because I don't think I've played any TTRPGs in person since the beginning of the pandemic, but like one of the things I genuinely do miss about playing in person, and Freeman, you've mentioned this a few times, and I think you experimented a little bit recently, is like the free ability to go from like sitting to standing, because there are some moments like when I'm GMing that I need to emphasize.
Get on my level, you casuals.
See, that's the thing. I fully bow to you in that respect, because like for me, I genuinely find like this specifically, it's not even just like the sitting standing thing. It's just like this. I find it so constraining. I'm putting.
No, I mean, it's the same thing I'm talking about with conducting. It really was. Like, there's a reason I was almost tipping over.
Yeah.
It's because you want the space to be expressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And like, and I'm Puerto Rican, so like half of my language is this. So like, that's what, and I don't have very long arms, but like they're longer than this, like and that's a problem sometimes.
Well, and there are techniques for remote, like if you want to play off of the Brady Bunch of it all, it's there for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do funny things with captions,
I don't know what you're referring to. I don't know who would do stuff like that.
I don't either. But there are some things that are for remote, but there's also role-playing language of in person, of catching eye contact.
Yeah.
So I know it's been a while, but I think like physical contact was a thing.
I seem to vaguely recall that was, yeah, I think that was
Dimly
part of it.
remember it, yes.
Yeah.
Like,
So like, and so like all of that is to say, I see all of these as the language of expression in role play. So if we're talking about like what is role play, those are some of the dials, as you were putting it, that we have. But to bring it into the topic, I think mechanics and use of those mechanics are another dial, a very significant dial. And that is where role playing and game design can meet very beautifully, because the use of mechanics is just another lever, like physical body language, a way to express character through the unique attributes of role-playing games. It's not like film. It's not like comics. There are all of these ways where like we try to approximate it in our description, or we try to approximate movement, all of those things. Game design is the thing where we're not approximating anything. Game design is itself. It is perhaps the essence of the unique aspect of what this can do expressively. And so how you use that, how you work with a game's design, how you use a design at the table, how you know, I got Kaylin up here in chat, like how we call troubles on ourselves, how you choose to advance a character, any interaction with mechanic, with the game system itself, offers potential for expression.
Yeah, I want to double back earlier to your comment or your assertion about games as art, because I think it's interesting now that we're talking about like the language of role playing and I think like that fits neatly into it too, because like any artist, writer, sculptor, painter, digital artist has tools, right? And I think in the context of role play and like gamified narrative, the game's mechanics are your tools that you're being given, and they can like for newer players or for people who are like perhaps unused to this kind of like play or this kind of art form, then like those can serve as kind of stepping stones. But also, like as with any tool, there's a lot that you can do to learn how to use it and leverage it. So like I think mechanics in that context sort of are like the tools of the tools of the trade, so to speak. But they're also kind of, but creating them is also its own art, which I think is fascinating. It's like circles within circles.
Because you're trying to build the structure, the container for a certain range of experiences, and you as a designer are trying to figure out what mechanics, what words, what can you say in the book, kind of like the way a screenplay is not a movie. So much happens through translation. The game book is not the game. But in the same way that a screenwriter is going to try to write toward the movie they want to be made, game designers, what you put in a random encounter table roller is a hint of the kinds of things that you find in the game. The amount of combat mechanics versus social or exploration mechanics. You're conveying things about your game, the way that a screenwriter conveys what kind of movie this screenplay is supposed to be.
Yes, I'm still listening. I have my audio is portable, thankfully, but I was jumping into the other room to get my my TTRPG binder, because I think like, speaking of tables, I think like Lasers and Feelings and similar like games like that are almost entirely driven by a D6 and some tables are like a perfect example of that. So I was just running to grab my like printed out copy.
I would agree.
Like
I had 5, like how many How many different hacks of lasers and feelings have I played now?
I have 3 of them sitting in this binder right now, one of which I wrote. Like,
I don't know how many episodes of Tempting Fate there. I could look on my IMDb of like how many things there are on there.
Oh,
So like for folks who don't know who the hell I am or what I'm talking about or what Tempting Fate is, one, they're carrier penguins and they fly and they're very majestic, and that's all you need to know about Tempting Fate. But also it was a game where every 1 to 3 weeks we would play a new lasers and feelings hack, and I did 5 like I don't know dozen episode seasons of it.
that's a lot
So-
of lasers.
So that's to say how much you can convey off of the limited tables of a one sheet.
yeah.
Like this right here is the
It's a gift.
entire the
Yep.
entire length and breadth of what your GM is going to run off of, and what you need is to roll a d6 4 times, and you need about 5 minutes to yourself to think about how you're going to put Zorgon the Conqueror wants to pacify the void crystals, which will rip a hole in reality, right?
Right. You know a lot about, okay, this is kind of a Hitchhiker's Guide kind of tone, aren't we? Okay, got it. Understood. Just having that in the table writing that as a designer, you've conveyed something about the game that you're gonna make, that you're looking for. And I think that sort of broadens out macro beyond just like role playing. I think if you have a very simulationist, high complexity, tactically focused game in your rule set, you're also, as a designer, intentionally or unintentionally even, conveying the kind of game that you are. When the rules tell you what kind of game it is, believe them.
This is I'm so glad that you brought that particular topic up, right? Like another analogy is the Matt Colvillism, the map is not the territory, right? Like there is so I've had a lot of my struggles with D&D in the last couple of years have been just like a misalignment between what I wanted to do and what the game was telling me it was like optimized for, right? And so like and less of a misalignment of goals and more of a misalignment of approaches truly is what kind of ended up happening with me. And so like I've lately had I've gotten back into D&D after kind of going on a tour of a variety of systems. I've gotten
An RPG rumspringe.
I wasn't calling it that, but I am now, and I honestly should have been. So, but yeah, and I've been getting back into it lately because of realizing why I was playing it in the first place, what I enjoyed about it in the first place, and trying to focus on those things. And that's not to say that you can't do a certain amount of fresh takes on the same thing or innovate in certain ways or homebrewing, which I do a lot of, but I think at a certain point, all of my homebrewing is all designed with the same principles that the game itself is designed. I want whatever I'm adding in, I want it to fit I want it to fill a hole in the design, but not to add a whole brand new thing that is alien to the design. And so like that's been where the source of my newfound enjoyment for D&D has come from recently, which is finding that place where like figuring out what is the game actually telling me, what have I not been listening to.
What's idiomatic to the game?
Yes, exactly.
In music school, when I was taking composition, we learned a lot about how for different instruments, different kinds of passages are idiomatic. You try to play multiple notes on a flute, they're going to look at you very politely and then turn around and walk away. You give it to a pianist, they're far more aware of what to do. There are some passages that technically I suppose I could hit all of those notes in succession, but I would be very irritated with you because it's unidiomatic. I like those nice sweeping, give me a scale, love it, great. some things are idiomatic, and likewise with role-playing games. Some experiences, some stories, some encounters are idiomatic to that game's design. And the more one samples systems, the better one gets a sense of like what feels like idiom, because you're expanding your catalog, sure.
Right.
And so it is nice when one is making a hack. What I think it allows for is I think it allows for some of that synergistic expressiveness. That's why I like idiomatic game design, because it lets me use it for that weird art stuff. It lets it be an extension of character more effectively for me, like a suit that fits. That it suits what I'm trying to do. I didn't mean it when I started, but I commit now.
Yeah, I do love it to that end when games just tell me what they are. Like, for instance, Lasers and Feelings begins with, you are the crew of the interstellar scout ship Raptor. All right, like that one sentence, I already know basically the kind of game I am going to be, like the genre. Like I do.
You know, you're in sci-fi now, and you know what your association is to your party.
Yep. And then like you read a couple more sentences and you get into it. The captain is like, something has happened to him. Okay, like there's weird alien stuff also in this setting.
So smartest thing that game is.
Yeah. It's like I super appreciate it, especially when games on the shorter side. I think actually games that are shorter, I think have to be much like short stories, have to be really airtight. Like pretty much
you got to convey what you're about. You don't have a lot of space to do it. You also don't have a lot of room to muddle what you're about. Hermes in chat talked about Cypher, and I love it as an example because Multicook Games intended a very narrative, wibbly game. That's very much what I think they see Cypher to be, as sort of an omnitool that can be hacked into anything. Like Cypher is sort of an Emacs of role-playing games. But because they gave themselves so much length, it actually ended up being fairly complex and fiddly, and like more of like a streamlined Pathfinder than I think the game sees itself as. It gave itself enough room to muddle what it's about, and a one page doesn't do it. It doesn't have time for that. Whatever it's about on that one page is all it's ever going to be about.
Yeah.
And then it's done.
I talk about this sometimes. I very briefly worked for a TTRPG, an indie TTRPG company that like, my job was to, in the words of my supervisor, my job was to be an evangelist for the game. And when I said, okay, great, well, I'm bringing a fresh perspective to this, so because I don't know much about the game, so tell me what are like some of the key elements of it. And this is where you start running into problems, I think, when the designer himself was unable to tell me in any way that took him less than 15 minutes. And it was when I say
that's a broader principle of design as creating toward a specific purpose or end. Yeah. If you cannot describe the purpose or end that you are creating toward, it will not be a success.
And it certainly made it difficult for me to do my job, because my job was to tell people what the game was about. And so,
have you tried cornering them in a room for 15 minutes? I hear people love that.
Yeah, no, like somebody stops by my booth at a convention and I'm selling my game. I have like maybe 15 seconds of their time, and if I cannot convey what Kobolds and Trenchcoats is in that span of time, like they will walk away.
And see, already look how much work you can do with a title. You know how much I know about Kobolds and Trenchcoats? More actually than that first sentence of Lasers and Feelings. If we want to get picky, I think you can do more to convey with tone the name of your ship. I think Raptor, there are so many genres in sci-fi that Raptor could be.
Yeah, like I think the opening line of Kobolds and Trenchcoats is, you are several kobolds standing on each other's shoulder in a trench coat. And that's the opening line of that one. Or you are, I think it
Right.
might be,
So
you
it's
are
a
several
serious,
kobolds in adventure.
dramatic, high crunch battle sim.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
that's precisely.
Exactly. We all know. Okay, so like weird question to bounce off of this, particularly since we have you so recently back from your travel among the indie RPG scene. What do you think is the arete of like the Lizard game of Dungeons and Dragons? What do you think makes it what it is or makes it interesting?
Genuinely, and this is not something that I've put a lot of thought into in terms of like putting it into words, I mean, but genuinely,
Blurt instinctively.
yes, genuinely, I believe that the core like game loop of D&D is you are an adventurer who fights monsters. Like,
Yes.
and like that, I think, and I realize that is a very like that could describe a lot of games, I suppose, but I don't know that D&D like I think it's hard to pin it down, to be honest with you, because it's a system that carries with it the weight of tradition, or if you want to be less charitable, the bloat of tradition, but
Sure.
it makes it hard to pin down. But I think genuinely at its core, it's a game about fighting monsters. Like, it's got robust combat rules. It has a monster manual as one of the core books. It pays lip service to like exploration and the other one, which whatever that one is a social
Interaction, I assume.
interaction, something like that. Yeah.
I don't know what they call it. I don't read
Yeah.
the Dungeon Master's Guide where they probably talk about that stuff. That one's not for me. That's the Forbidden Town.
It's it probably, that one could have been a memo, frankly. But an addendum or something.
Did I buy that? I haven't read. I know that like people say D&D 4E's Dungeon Master Guide is one of the best how-to docs. So like I don't know that I'll believe it if you dunk on, just because I haven't read. I won't believe it that you dunk on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't honestly know, because like my main experience with the Dragon game, or anything approaching the Dragon game, is 5e and Pathfinder 1e, and like I've played 3.5, but I've never GM'd 3.5. And like so yeah, I couldn't honestly speak to that one way or the other. What I will say is that the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5e doesn't really get to the heart of what I would want from something called the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I think there are useful things in there. But no, to your question, I honestly think that at its core, D&D is a game about fighting monsters.
Sure. Though I think it's orthogonal perhaps to the question, because it's not unfashionable to dunk on the Lizard game. Perhaps because we always like to see something great brought low. But to put forth at least my notion of it, I think it's the magic system.
Interesting.
A lot of RPGs have a combat system. Plenty of RPGs. Most RPGs. Most games have a mechanic to let you punch someone in the face when they're being a jerk. They may or may not have a mechanic to let you tell them off, but they'll have a mechanic to let you punch them in the face about it. Most have that. The unusual thing about Dungeons and Dragons, broadly speaking, is that no one, like, very, very few games, fewer don't than do, bother to come up with hundreds of spells. That is not a common magic system approach. For instance, you see it in my favorite game, Invisible Sun, also by Monty Cook Games. So you see, with the one hand I throw a shade, with the other hand I draw them in for a hug. But I think, so if I'm to play off of the unique virtues of 5e, for instance, I'd invoke the magic system, because I think that's where it does something that not all games do. Punching someone in the face in D&D looks a lot like punching someone in the face in another game. But casting spells in Dungeons and Dragons isn't a whole lot like other games beyond the ones that are very, very, very close and intentionally related. Like, yes,
Right.
of course, it looks like Pathfinder.
Right.
Pathfinder overtly modeled itself on Dungeons and Dragons. Doesn't count. Like an independent magic system. It doesn't work like Mage. It doesn't work like Ars Magica. It doesn't work anything like the way any Powered by the Apocalypse game would ever design a magic system. Good God. That would be hideously unidiomatic.
Yeah.
To Powered by the Apocalypse. But like, if I'm just thinking like, what makes D&D interesting? That's my assertion.
What do I look for when I pick up a D&D supplement book, right? The first thing I'm checking is, are there new spells? And what are the subclasses that have been introduced? Are there
Classes,
any
feats, give me.
subclasses? Yeah, and those. And also just to illustrate your point, Sam, because I think it's actually a compelling point that you make there.
Thank you. I sure put them by accident.
This is the section on combat in the player's handbook.
Same.
This is spells.
It's a game about magic.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a reason everyone's all attracted to the casters very, very often, because I think they're doing more interesting stuff in their game system.
This is a really good point. And I realize now that I think I misunderstood your question. But I'm kind of glad that I did, because it helps me kind of see what you're saying, because I actually had never considered that. That's an excellent point. I had never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Recently, on a related sort of thing, like a friend of mine turned me on to Level Up, or Advanced 5e by EN Publishing. I don't know if you've looked into this at all. It's really interesting. It's basically, it takes, I don't even know how to break it down, but it's somewhere in between advanced rules for 5th edition D&D and a totally separate game based on the 5e rule set. It's basically what a Blades
in the Dark to PBTA is this to 5e.
Yes, it's a little bit like what Pathfinder was to 4e, right? Where it's looking backwards for design from earlier things to bring into the more modern kind of thing. And I think that is
fork. Yeah. That's a worthwhile fork.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that it does, and I'm just now, thanks to what you just said, Sam, I've been trying to parse it the last few days, because I got it. I'm not even going to bother telling you when that happened, because as we've established already, I have no concept of time this week.
What is time?
Yeah. But I got it relatively recently, and one of the things that just now, as you said, that clicked for me about that is that the martial classes, the way that the martial classes are designed, it's a lot more similar to how spellcasters work in the OG 5e.
It's an interesting system. Its complexity is a little more al dente. And this is also I do agree, it's a lovely interaction to have had this between the two of us, just because I think it also illustrates a way to look at game design, both in this games as art, how do we use game design for expressive artsy theater kid shit, but also just as a gamer who might approach this as a game hobby flavored approach. What is this game? What does it do? What makes it interesting? There's so much friction with the Lizard game trying to be an omni tool, or people trying to use it as an omni tool because it's better than learning multiple pieces, multiple gaming languages.
Yeah.
But equally, I think one of the great ways to figure out what a game is about is to look at it and say, what makes it interesting? What do I think it's trying to do always? What do I think is interesting about this game? And I know, as someone who's interested in game design, I use that lens every time I look at a game, because it's how I can find treasure in a game that I will not ever play. But you know what? I actually really like the way you do skills and attributes, and yoink.
Well, it's I saw somebody a while back say that you don't necessarily have to play one of these tabletop RPG rule books to be engaging in some form of the hobby or play with them, right? Because sitting there and reading through the rule book and doing exactly what you've just described is also kind of like another similar form of
it is a
engagement
mode
there.
of experience with role-playing games, though in a sort of like no plan survives contact with the enemy sort of way. I've discovered if I don't play test, I don't really know how it feels. Is when you're rolling dice, feeling the statistics, feeling like the rolls, feeling what you interact with frequently, what's actually called for. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've read a game I thought I knew it, and then I get in, I did not know it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But that's also, I mean, I guess there's also don't play the game, play the GM. Like, I mean, and D&D offers my favorite example of this. You know how some GMs will say you're climbing the side of a building. Some GMs are making athletics check because athletics says climbing, and some GMs are athletics or acrobatics, whichever you want. I don't know about you, but I build differently for the acrobatics and athletics GMs. I can safely dump athletics if I know I don't have to use it to climb.
Yeah.
So, which is to say that like there's the level of the rules, and then there is the emergent experience of rules at the table, and both are absolutely modes of interaction with a role-playing game and modes of interaction with the hobby. But gosh, can they be different sometimes? Just because it's the interface with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite the same thing, but I just think of like my experience running Cypher for almost or over 2 years now versus playing Cypher, and it's a very different thing. You don't actually need to know how to play Cypher in order to run Cypher.
Yes, this. Leaving aside that Cypher is my go-to example of like sitting with a game for a while before realizing what it's about, because I believed what they were selling me about it being like a narrative kind of wibbly game, and it took me a while of actually playing the game to realize that it is crunchy and very unforgiving in its builds. You could like the variance between someone who tried to optimize a Cypher build and someone who didn't is unsatisfyingly antisocial. Because I don't want to like have a power trip over my friends. I just want to look the game in the eyes and establish dominance over the rule set. It's not about the other people at the table at all. I would be such a jerk if I were trying to do that. That's not okay. That's like some weird ego stuff. No, I want to have my weird ego stuff with the rule set directly.
Yes.
Anyway, but no, I do have a GM who lauds Cypher as incredibly easy because the players are carrying that game.
Yes, because
which I think it is just because the GM has to put in so much prep work into like making the story that like if the players carry the rules, that actually kind of feels like a better distribution of labor.
Yeah.
Than most games where the GM kind of holds everything in their head.
And the thing is like with
you just have to spit difficulty numbers out of but
exactly exactly genuinely yes like because the thing for me is like as a GM, like when I'm running D&D, for instance, like my two most run games are like D&D and Cypher. Like those are the two games that I've run the most, and I'm already the kind of GM who's going to tell my like I don't try to like fully understand exactly how a player's character works, but the difference is that in D&D, the things that the DM has to know are very similar to the things that the player has to know, and that's not true in Cypher. And so like it is a little bit, it is natural to me in the sense that like in that difference, in the sense that in D&D I'm already like I don't know how your specific subclass works. I don't know how it works. I've not played it myself, and unless I've
you
played
have
it
to
myself,
carry those wild shape rules.
Exactly.
Like you carry that, but like we both share the same combat architecture.
Right. Yes. And then
in Cypher it's out here like, oh yeah, you have to worry about everything to do with rolling dice. If a die is involved, I am not.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think it's funny you mentioned wild shape, and like this isn't so much making an insightful point as it is a complaint. But wild shape, it is my belief that if you actually look at, I don't know, John, if you still have the player's handbook near you, but if you actually look at the actual real estate on the page that wild shape rules take up, if your ability needs that much space on a page where the most abilities take a fraction of that, I think it maybe needs to be designed better.
Wild shape begins over here. Wild shape concludes over here.
Yeah.
Do you think elegance is necessary for a fun ability in a role-playing game?
I don't think it's necessary.
So do you think there may be some players who would dig the complexity? Basically, is it you have a range of different approaches to playing at the table? I know I love playing rogues, and I love them in part because it's my sit back, take some popcorn, turn my brain off play style of I attack, bonus action, hide, repeat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I want to play a high level wizard, and those are just completely different approaches to complexity. So I
think for me, what it is with specifically in general, yes, I don't think that elegance is necessary, but I think specifically with the wild shape rules, I know that I have read those. It's one of the main reasons I've never played a druid. I have read those many times, and I'll also caveat that all of my evidence here is purely anecdotal. But I've read those rules many times, and have yet to have any of it stick in my brain. I've never had a situation where I didn't have to have either a player at the table or me personally have to not have to reference the wild shape rules. It just, at some point, there's so many moving parts in the way that the wild shape is designed that it just feels like it could have been maybe explained differently, maybe, or broken down in sort of, and maybe explained differently, maybe designed in a sort of more elegant fashion. But I don't know, there's just something off there, and I couldn't honestly put my finger on exactly what it is, but something about those just feels very difficult to wrap my brain around, basically.
I think there are a lot of games, and you talked earlier about sort of the legacy bloatware of D&D that I think in 5e comes from a game that was fundamentally simulationist in origin, converting and streamlining while still, or moving toward, frankly, a different aim in design. We're talking about design creating toward an end. The end shifted over literal decades, and advances in role-playing games as a thing and just wanting to do stuff. But carrying the legacy of needing to feel like D&D, which is kind of does this feel like Star Wars? What makes something feel like Star Wars? It's a some people say a thing that didn't feel like Star Wars for me. And one cannot put one's finger on precisely what makes something feel like Star Wars, but you can only move so far from something. If you're Hitchhiker's Guide, if you will not feel like Star Wars. At a certain point, the rubber band breaks. And so you have to stay within the tension of the rubber band. And so too, over its editions, did Dungeons and Dragons, and carrying perhaps a little more complexity than this version of the design truly wants, not for the sake of the best way to design a game mechanic.
Right.
But so that it doesn't go from feeling like Star Wars to feeling like Hitchhiker's Guide. Not to say that the rules would, but to say that D&D uniquely has to worry about the rubber band breaking.
Right. That's
Pathfinder, to another extent, I should say. Pathfinder was a 3.5 fork, and then Pathfinder 2 is, to its credit, Pathfinder 2.
And
where you were talking about a 5e fork.
Right.
Which is different than Pathfinder 2, and respect on Pathfinder for that.
Yeah.
I love that they're complex. This is what we were about, absolutely, and we're going to lean into it in our second edition selves. I love that they unapologetically did that.
I'm sorry.
I remember seeing the 2e manual and being like, oh my god.
Yeah. real quick, I'm sorry, before you, I really want to acknowledge, Amethyst Cat Lady's comment about how to Train Your Dragon is a horse girl movie, but dragons.
Oh, that's correct.
That's
Yes.
very correct. I just
Wow,
never thought of it that way, and
actually.
that's
Yeah.
amazing, and I love that.
Oh,
Yes.
this is so many exciting things are happening in my brain right now. The fireworks going off, like so many things have just clicked home about
beauty of
about How to
Ramblemancy.
Train Your Dragon, and it's
And you know what? This is why reskinning role playing games works sometimes, because and that's when it works, because How to Train Your Dragon can be a horse girl movie. A game of How to Train Your Dragon could be filed off and reskinned very easily. You just change the entries on the tables into a horse girl RPG.
yeah.
And I feel like that is a great proxy for when you can use a system to hack and when you can't.
Yes.
Like, can you actually file the serial numbers off of a thing? And then it's like, oh yeah, it's totally that thing. Then you can probably use the system.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another comment in chat too, like along this line where Cactus Hug said, I feel like Wild Shape is carried by the idea of how cool it is. You can do a lot of cool stuff in D&D, but turn into a bear is toward the top of that list. So like even somebody who's sort of like low crunch will be interested in it.
This is also why people will always play Beastmaster Ranger, no matter how much it hurts.
Because you get a pet. Like
Right.
You-
And we're here for pets. Like, we want the pets. Druids also want pets. You know you do.
Yes.
Just be honest.
This is why.
Like, you did it for the animal handling check, and it's dope as hell. You have like speak with plants, speak with animals. We know all that. Look, I love you and I respect you, and I will catch all the Pokemon in my game, so I'm right here with you. But it is what it is.
This is why. See, this right here is exactly why. Whenever a player tells me that they want to play a ranger, I am very quick to jump in and say, okay, understand real quick before you make your choice about subclass that I am the type of GM that will allow like non-game mechanics for you to have a pet. So like if what you want is the pet, don't feel like you need to hurt yourself with the Beastmaster Ranger. Go with a thing that is cool. The like Colossus Slayer in the Hunter Ranger is great.
I don't know why we're just talking in particular about the Lizard game, because
Right,
frankly,
yeah.
most of my career is built on the fact that I play games that are not that. But I also play it because it is like the common, like the lingua franca of role-playing
Yeah.
games for a lot of people. But I think it's because the Ranger doesn't have like favored terrain, favored enemy is never going to be as good or as cool a signature ability as Smite or Sneak Attack or Rage or Wild Shape until you had something that cool. It's just justice for Rangers.
Yes, I
Justice
agree.
for
Like
Rangers.
even if like I'm glad they're like giving guilt gifts in the form of subclasses.
Mhm.
Like they have put their heart and soul into subclass design for the Ranger. Like those are the I'm sorry flowers of game design. See,
Every
chat
single-
lighting up Gloomstalker, Colossus,
Yeah.
so many.
Oh,
like
yeah.
they've put out such fire subclasses for the Ranger.
Every single
But you
time
know
I read it,
why?
Yeah,
You know why?
it's an apology for the rest of the class.
yeah, it's yeah.
Because I think the magic system is the coolest part about 5e.
Yeah,
Which is why classes that get a bunch of spell-like abilities are the ones that feel the coolest.
Yeah.
To
Although
where
I
right
still
back around
love
to-
just rolling silly high numbers. There's a reason why I think I love playing rogues as my popcorn class, and I love introducing people to that game through rogues, because what do you do in your first session of D&D? You roll some skill checks, you get in a fight with something, you probably pick a fight with them, and then you combat. You roll in as a rogue. You roll dummy high on those skill checks because you got expertise. You get into combat, you roll all of the D6s you have, and you have to borrow from your friend, and like you roll tons of them, and it feels real good to your clicky clacky math rock brain, and like it's just setting you up to have like a straightforward and good time.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's been a while since I've played D&D. Well, it's actually not been that long. It just feels like it's been a lot longer. Because our home game, I played a barbarian, and because it was the easiest class for me to comprehend at the time. And in being introduced back into D&D recently with our new game that Lucas is running, it's a game in Chult, which is basically Tomb of Annihilation, but take out the cheese grater at the end. My new obsession with getting back into the game is actually playing a magic class, because you're absolutely right. The magic is so interesting, and it's so cool about how you get magic also in certain classes, and how
Truly playing the magic system the way that it's written is not a thing that I see done in a whole lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I think in a lot of cases it shouldn't be done. Like the material components are not my personal favorite.
I always forget about those anyway.
Right, like what you choose. Like there's a whole lot of buffet style to this game, and too many systems. Sometimes you figure out that if you take a component out, it breaks. But a lot of times you can just do it. And gosh, is streaming good at really quickly showing you what you can yeet. Because we don't want, if it's a rule we can't remember to look up and we can't look it up quickly, that is not a rule that exists at a streaming table. That's why you see so much rules light, because we don't want that air.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, the crunchier the game is, the more often you have to try and figure out, all right, am I going to just pitch this? Like, what judgment call am I going to make? And like, when you ease that mental load off of yourself, like even having to decide, I'm just going to make a judgment call here, like that's still a certain amount of mental load. And if you're playing a game that has less, either where everyone already understands the rules very well, or one that doesn't have a lot of them or isn't super crunchy, then like that allows, I think, everybody to be like further into the experience.
This was also why I became a rules lawyer in the first place, was anxiety and just various manifestations. But I have played most of my games on camera because I got thrown into the deep end very early. And if you learn the game way too much, then you're not going to get caught out. You can just carry it. It'll be okay.
If I know all the rules, I can't.
Then I can't mess up. And then everyone won't like me anymore.
Yeah. I could see that for sure. Yeah.
Like this, there are a whole lot of reasons people become min-maxers, power gamers, whatever have you. And I defend power gamers, like Caitlin in chat, who does, yo, the power play build is pristine. But
I'm flashing back to our home D&D game where Caitlin like shanghaied me into like allowing her to stack guidance with the other cleric in our party.
I mean, there's nothing in the rules says a dog can't play basketball.
Yeah.
There we go. Like
I wanted to go back real quick to something that Freeman said a second ago, which was about, you know, like that you were talking about, like how the characters get their magic and that sort of thing. And I think that's a very important thing, and it's related to what we were talking about earlier with the role playing and the mechanics. This is sort of the intersection here, which is that often when reading a book, when reading a rules book for a TTRPG, sometimes the fiction of something isn't, and this is a little bit like what Cactus Hogs was saying about the wild shape. Sometimes the fiction of something is enough to carry a mechanic or something that is maybe like, you know, because like I cannot tell you how many times I have made a character purely based on the fiction of the character or of the concept that I built in my head based on what was written about it in the book. Flavor text is incredible. They'll
bait you. They will debate you so hard. And that's because, like, in the schema of, like, artistic creation and design traditions, for all that it's been around for decades, role-playing games are fairly new in developing their language. Just a few decades, role-playing game design has gotten so much better at developing new approaches to mechanics, new modes of interaction, ways to more effectively do the thing it's trying to do. But by the same token, that's because role-playing game design history is littered with examples of trying to get at the thing and the rules didn't act like this should be so cool and it doesn't feel like the thing.
Yes. And I know that that's something that I never really thought about this until I had somebody explain it to me, but this is why there is often a situation where you bring a new player to the table and they have a powerful, like they have a character in mind already, and they have a powerful fiction built around that character without even knowing whether or not the game can support that fiction. And I think that is, I never thought about this before I had somebody explain this to me, that like I think that's one thing that I will give Cypher, is that it gives you a lot of tools that you can sort of support the fiction of your character in a lot of ways, that whereas like D&D or other like, I don't know if it's necessarily to do with like crunch or rigidity of rules, but like but there is something in games like that make it, if they have a very clear type of character that you're making, if you bring one that like isn't necessarily supported, you might be okay. You might be fine. It might work out perfectly fine. You might have a great time, but there also is an equally or higher chance that like it's gonna break down somewhere and it's not gonna feel right. It's not gonna have that feeling of like.
See, so the very fact that feeling exists, that friction, and that we're all fairly familiar with this idea, is why I think game mechanics are a dial for artistic expressiveness. Because when it clicks, when you have that synergy, when you have none of that friction, the build is an expression of the fiction of the character. It's just games as art.
Yeah.
You can rules and like ultimately this is like, I started power gaming because I was insecure and I didn't want to like have to be carried and like at the table with all the people who know everything and like gatekeep. But now it's just because you can do artistic stuff with it, that you can, if you can read a game properly, figure out what the design is trying to get at, figure out what it actually is getting at, figure out a character that can work with the rules that you've been given so that you can use those rules to fulfill a fiction, then the rules, the design is elevating your narrative. And so there's the level of puzzle of figuring out those rules, of like teasing through, that I know as someone who likes optimization, I find very just intellectually satisfying. But ultimately, once I've puzzled through those rules, it gives me a better understanding of what kinds of fiction this game can actually support. Not always what it says it will support, but what it will actually support.
Yeah.
Like, you can be a werewolf in Cypher. You can't be a powerful one because that focus sucks.
Yeah. It sure does.
So, I mean, to the point that, like, to the extent that I made a face about fitting the fiction, right, it's mostly because of things like that, and because I think the gulf of optimization in that system is such that, like, yeah, you can make it fit, but it's like a very punishing thing, and it's very easy to fall out of fit in Cypher if you aren't like really doing your nerd homework.
Yeah.
I love doing my nerd homework, but like, again, I feel really bad like if other folks at the table didn't, and it's like, oh, like you end up at like weird difficulty levels. I hate that. It feels terrible.
Yeah.
I have like I've played a few Cypher characters in this point, and I have noticed that like you do have to be kind of very much more focused on like how you build your character, I think, than a lot of people expect with a system that sells itself as being
Sells itself so wittily.
Yeah, because I straight up will have several abilities that like I just don't. I noticed like over the lifetime of a character, I had several abilities that I just almost never use.
Yep.
And I was like, and like now in the context of this this conversation, it's like oftentimes because they were frankly like just not powerful enough, or just completely like not relevant to what I wanted to do, I think.
So I think what's kind of interesting, like the weird thing, I never actually get to talk about the particulars of game design in Cypher, but I lived in this system for a year.
Good.
So like I lived with a lot of feeling about it. Is that, yeah, it sells itself. It comes in on certain games and certain concepts, and it takes a while for you to learn which game mechanics are powerful and which ones, in fact, are not. Which is why it's become my go-to example of no plan survives content. Like you don't really know the game design until you're into it, and that game systems will debate you.
Yeah.
And it's so, I guess it is a game from someone who is steeped in D&D and wanted to make something narrative. Someone who's like old school, every big blockbuster game that people who started playing role-playing games decades before I did remember nostalgically, like Planescape and shit. Their idea of a narrative game. Again, though, if you're into a dope magic system, Invisible Sun is what D&D, like the hundreds of spells side, it's an Invisible Sun, makers of Cypher. You want like Ars Magica, that's also a different magic subsystem. It's also an Invisible Sun, different character class plays that one. You want to like Branded Battle Mage, you can also do that. That's a separate but kind of integrated. But just like if you want really, really complicated magic. Also, I'm just gonna keep selling Invisible Sun. Yeah. It's so good.
I have been dying to play Invisible Sun for years.
It's
like
so good.
I have that is like one of my bucket list games. I'm like, I must play this. It looks like
it's so complex. The complexity is bananas. But you also get to create your own spells in a highly complex system, and that's a mistake.
Oh no.
It's such a mistake. Because you don't want a magic system. Like apparently Magic the Gathering is Turing complete.
Wait.
Yeah.
What?
Like through the cards you could build a Turing machine in Magic the Gathering, but just like
I need to go learn about that right now. I used to play so much Magic.
I don't play Magic. I'm just like, I know some about it, but like you can sort of see, like, especially with enough use of milling and you can create logic loops and so on. But like when you can build your own spells in a complex magic system, you can break the game. There's my like game design nerds pitch to Invisible Sun.
That's like,
you can do such rude things to it, and you know what? They said you could ahead of time.
This is my favorite intersection of like the same. It's the overlap to me between like Power Gamer and also Speedrunner. Just like, how can I take this game and crack it open like an egg? Like
yep. And so like there are a lot of different ways to enjoy role-playing games. Like this like weird speedrunning optimizing thing of like, oh my gosh, you can do such rude things. It's like a really fun way to play games. And it's really fun when the design delivers that satisfyingly. If you're there for like, I want streamlined, lightweight theater kid experience, and I only want rules that facilitate my theater kid experience, And I want rules that do that as well as possible. One, I wouldn't recommend Invisible Sun. Two, I don't know if you have players who like really are into that mess and they'll just carry all of the rules in their head like an encyclopedia. Like I've probably read 6 different books and have page numbers in my head. Like if you want to have a cast full of those, absolutely still run Invisible Sun. But different games for different things.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, different types of role-playing experiences you want to construct, which again, back to center, back to topic. That's the role of all of these different designs. That when you can really grok what they're about, what they're truly about, not what they say they're about, like Cypher debating you, then you can build something with it and you know what you should build. And I recommend building what you think is most interesting about the game and leaning into the things about a game that you find most interesting, whatever's grabbing you. To me, if I look at D&D, it's the magic system. I wish it were the healing. Someday a game is going to give me like, okay, a couple give me a good healing mechanic. Phoenix Dawn Command, lovely healing mechanic. There are a handful out there. But like figuring out games, looking at what there is that's lovable about it. That's maybe my favorite way to build a character. Figuring out a game system and what I love most about it. What would be most interesting to play? That was where Lacey came from with Cypher. I went through all of the foci and found the one that I thought the focus was the most dope. There's like some early machine proficiencies that let you do some weird skill cap stuff early on. So like that was an easy early sell. And like, yes, also it was 100% about making my GM have a ton of NPC voices and just everything is alive and everything is a Pokemon. Yes, all of these things can coexist in truth. But like when I was first looking at them, I skimmed all of the foci and like that was the thing that I found lovable about the Cypher system.
Yeah.
That's what I played. I think that's a great way to interface with a role-playing game and have a fun time about it, especially because I think so many, like, it's such a common experience to come into games like the Lizard game, perhaps particularly the Lizard game, and see so much about it that isn't what we're looking for. And we have so many tools as people who understand, who like read through game systems, work with game systems, understand them, want to bend them to our will, want to step on their neck with our high heels, that we can figure out what is lovable, what we can build from it to love, and how to play into the aspects of games that will bring us joy while we're playing them. Because I think that's life's too short to not enjoy playing a Lizard game.
I think there cannot be a better way here at the end of our stream to wrap this all up neatly than that. Sam, thank you so much for coming and having this chat with us. Like the number of times throughout my awareness of your proclivity for like game mechanics and all that sort of stuff, the number of times in that period where I have said that, like, wow, I'd really just like to sit with Sam and have these conversations about the nuts and bolts, because like I love talking about the nuts and bolts. Like not everybody does.
There's
and
so
that's
much
fine.
in it. There's so much. It's so weird and complex and like such a high ceiling for skill expression. Like there's so much in this. I usually bounce special interest real quick. This one's hung on to me for years. This one's real good.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna stick here.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for coming and joining.
Great.
Yeah, it was
Anytime.
so much fun. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening, this zone. We appreciate all of you hanging out with us, chatting with us. Um, I while didn't get a whole lot of time to like interact with a lot of your comments in chat. I read most
Know
of
that
them. They are
I was reading along, and there was a lot of there's a
so
lot
much.
of good commentary and interesting
Yes.
things in chat.
Yeah,
Like
y'all are
it's one of
great,
my
and this
favorite
is
experiences to do that.
exactly y'all are great, and I that's one of the reasons I love doing this live on the internets, because collectively, as I have said, collectively by sheer numbers, chat is much smarter than we are and can say a lot of really great things, and I learn a lot
Yo.
from like Ramblemancy from all of you. So thank you everybody for coming and joining, for hanging out with us. um Pretty standard week this week. We have In Too Deep, our all LGBTQ plus D&D game is coming back on Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. We have Infinite Horizon.
Isn't that just a D&D game? I'm sorry.
You know what? It is, but we did it on purpose this time. We did it on purpose. The Our Infinite Horizon, our Cypher System Sci-Fi Supers TTRPG is coming back on Wednesday, 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that is our week. We will also be back here at this exact time next week with Ramblemancy, with the topic to be announced at some point in the coming week. Our Beyond the Roll, our Patreon shorts, the second part of our first ever run of it, is coming out on Sunday. You can catch it on Patreon, or if you are subscribed to us here on Twitch and also in our Discord, you can catch it there too. So
Forgetting that I made that command.
this will plague me to the end of my existence. It may even become the end of my existence, as it will hunt me down and consume me from the inside. So all of that is stuff that you're able to, that you can, if you want to keep apprised of what we are doing. If you are not already in the Discord, you should join us there, because that's where you'll find. Basically, that is our portal to everything that Rule of Lore is doing these days. It's not the most mystical of portals, but I think most things are what you make them. So, if you want it to
There's
be
no
more...
ranking anyway.
Right, yeah.
There's no U.S. News and World Reportal.
Besides,
Right,
you can be greeted by a chorus every morning of good morning and good zones throughout the day from all of our lovely community, and it's the sweetest thing that I think occurs in there. Is waking up every morning, checking my phone, and having half a dozen people been like, "Good zone, everybody, and happy Ramble Day." And I'm like, I adore all of you.
So that's where you can find all the stuff that we're doing. Sam, go ahead and tell folks where they can find you.
Oh, most of the time you can't find me. My stealth check is too high, but you can make your perception check according to a schedule outlined on my twitch.tv about page. That's twitch.tv/Delevely, DELEVELY. My one-offs like this, I tend to announce on Twitter at Tchaikovsky, CHAIKOVSKY. Of particular interest to this channel, perhaps, is Season 5 of Power Play, an ongoing role-play superhero story that I do. You know the whole cast, because I am the final Infinity Stone of
That's
that
right.
particular gauntlet. So, snaps to Ramblemancy for doing it. Well done. We're very proud of you. And I am very proud of Power Play. It is the kind of thing that just should have infinite TikToks. And until we get to such crisis on infinite TikToks, we just have me TikToking about it. Please also, if 5 seasons of a thing seems like a thing you don't want to jump into, or on board, you know what's real easy to onboard? Something that like only 2 episodes of exist. I have just begun an ongoing campaign, Barony of Olives, a Changeling the Dreaming campaign with the Streampunks, jammed by Eric Campbell. So if you like Shield of Tomorrow, Eric's TBD RPG, Callisto 6, Before the Gate or Clear Skies or Starjammer 7 Raven. You might also like the thing we just recorded last night was the most us episode there's ever been. So if you like those things, or you don't know if you like things, go check that out. That's on Q Times. And again, it's on my schedule. So go check that out. That's the best way to find all the things. Thank you so much.
Yeah, incredible. So go check all that out, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and hanging tonight. Sam, thank you once again for joining us. And we will see you hopefully on Tuesday for In Too Deep. But if not, we will see you the next time you decide to come roll with us. Good night and good zone, everybody.
Oof.